1960s were a fascinating time for NASCAR racing. It's a time where the sport grew from its infancy as a smaller series to one that was recognized on a national stage. With many of the iconic venues having been built during the decade, it was a time really where the sport solidified itself into what it would become and created that framework that would guide it on to even bigger and better things. Many folks really like the 1960s because it was that high time of the actual stock car period that NASCAR was built off of. The cars in the 1960s were as close to stock as you could really get while still having some race car elements thrown in, but everything that you saw racing on the track could in one way or another be bought from a manufacturer. The end of the decade and right into the start of the 1970s is where the whole manufacturer era hit its pinnacle in the coveted Aero Wars that brought us such great machines as the Plymouth Superbird and Dodge Daytona. And that era was the subject of this game. This is NASCAR Legends from Papyrus, a racing sim that was released back in 1999. It's one I've taken a look at before and streamed a couple races from, but it's something I want to look at specifically today because of a little project that I've been working on. I credit Grand Prix Legends, Papyrus's 1998 Formula One sim, for having piqued my interest in classic vintage motorsport, but I think NASCAR Legends is every bit as responsible. For myself, as somebody that found Grand Prix Legends quite difficult to handle on the equipment and the systems that we were using back in the late 90s, NASCAR Legends was much more approachable and something that probably for the first year or two I spent a lot more time in than Grand Prix Legends. Now, this sim wasn't that well received. It was seen as kind of archaic when it came out because it used Papyrus's older kind of 2D style physics engine that all of the NASCAR sims had used up until NASCAR Racing 4, which was to come out in the next couple of years. But when this game came out and NASCAR 3 released at the same time used that older engine, the reviews were not quite as favorable. And because this one was dealing with older NASCAR, it just didn't quite hit like I think Papyrus hoped it would. And although some small communities popped up around the time, they faded out pretty quickly. You didn't hear a lot about NASCAR Legends in the sim racing community. That always bummed me out a little bit. This was an era, 1970, the 1970 NASCAR season. I always wanted to learn a little bit more about that. And I remember being disappointed that more folks didn't paint car sets and cars and things and make tracks and all of the types of things that we saw for other sims. There certainly was some of that for NASCAR Legends, but not nearly on the level that you saw it for NASCAR Racing 2 or even 3. Everything that came out for this sim was really focused right around 1970, rounding out the calendar with a few extra tracks and adding a few of the missing drivers for that 70 season. So that brings us to this project that I've wanted to do for quite a long time, to add a car set, another set of cars, to give some sort of progression and multiple seasons to NASCAR Legends that fits this late 60s, early 70s period. And so over the past few weeks, I really sat down and actually did it and hammered it out and painted a 1968 car set for the sim. This car set includes all of the main drivers and teams for the 1968 season, 51 different drivers in all across 53 different paint schemes and cars. And it gives you just about everything that you'd need to run a race with all of the notables from the season. Now, there were well over 100 drivers that took part in the 1968 season, almost 150 actually, across the 49 different races that they had that year. And it was a schedule so long actually, it crept into 67. It started in the fall of 67 in November and went through November of 1968 across 49 different rounds, many of the races being small half-mile, quarter-mile ovals, dirt and asphalt. And so you'd always have the same dozen drivers or so going from race to race to race, but you would have a bunch of local drivers and teams that would only do one or two races during the year. And so when putting together a set like this, it's tough to figure out who exactly to choose, but I think I got all of the notable drivers and teams, and certainly enough to make it feel like 1968. Now, I've done a few other enhancements to the game, to the cars and things for this set. They, of course, no longer show the wings on the cars for the Plymouths and the Dodges. I've edited the models of the cars so that they're always the non-winged versions. And I've done a little bit of tweaking with how they sit to the ground, lowered the cars a little bit, incorporating some of the great work that others have done to add in the 3D tires, and I repainted all the tire rims and everything, trying to make things just look nice and clean and somewhat realistic. As realistic as you can get with a sim from 1999. And so I'm putting this up for download for anybody that wants to download it. I have no idea how many folks might have this game and might even boot it up to this day. But even if it's just a couple folks, or maybe this video or this overview makes you interested in it, I want to make it available for others to try out. But I really did this for myself and as something that I really have wanted for quite a long time. And so I do want to do a small race today to show this off and maybe talk about why I think this game's quite a lot of fun. But we will take a look at the driver info just to show you a little bit. I could walk through and talk about every single driver in the list that we've put together, because I've spent so much time doing some research for this. But I put together a default list of the Grand National 1968. These are all of the drivers that did the majority of the races, or all the ones that did the major races. I really based the list of cars off of the drivers that did all of what I'd call the crown jewel events, or those big 500-mile races, the Daytona 500, the Charlotte 600, the World 600 there, the races at Darlington. Those were and still are the crown jewels of the sport. So all the teams that made it out to those races were the ones I tried to do. But then I did other ones that maybe only did the short tracks, but did many of them, so it would make sense to include them, and came up with a list, I think, of a pretty representative set of folks for the 1968 season. 42 in the main list, leaving a place for you to pop one in for yourself. And then I've got 11 extra cars here that I just felt like doing. But if we jump in, the very first one, David Pearson. This was the 1968 champion. And with all of these cars, I've tried to include a photo of the driver. I've tried to put a little description, something about the season for that driver, or for that team, anything to add some context, fill out all the different stats and all of that. And of course, add driver ratings to make them perform realistically on the track. But Pearson was the 68 champion. He actually did 48 of the 49 races. He missed one race, but still was able to come away with the championship. A pretty close battle. He won 16 races though, and got a top 5 in 36 of them. So 36 out of 48 for top 5s. That's really why he won the championship that season. Driving for Holman-Moody, a very iconic car, and one I tried to spend just a little extra time on to make sure it looked as perfect as possible. And then runner-up in the championship, Bobby Isaac with the K&K Dodge Charger, another iconic car from the time period. Finished second in the championship despite only getting 3 wins on the season compared to Pearson's 16. But it was consistency that got Bobby Isaac up there. 36 top 10s out of his 49 starts, and just finished 126 points behind Pearson, which is pretty close for going 49 races. Even up until that last race, it was technically still an open championship. And so I've got Isaac's car here on the Dodge Charger. It brings up an important thing about this set. NASCAR Legends only has 2 different car models. The Torino kind of car model that we saw with David Pearson here, the taller, more boxier one. And then that Dodge Daytona Plymouth Superbird model, and this is the short track version of it. And so I made a decision to paint all of the cars on a 68 model year of car. I think Bobby Isaac ran a 67 Dodge for most of the season. And especially as you get into some of the smaller teams and drivers, there were some teams using cars as far back as 1965 during the season, 66 for sure. And I could have spent all day trying to make different cars with different headlights and things try to fit onto these bodies. But since the body styles themselves, the 3D model is really only for the late 60s, early 70s cars, I did upgrade everybody to be running the latest and greatest as it would have been in 1968. You, of course, can't have 60s or 70s NASCAR without Richard Petty. 1968 was considered a bad season for him, even though he got 16 wins, matching David Pearson. 31 top 5s, 35 top 10s. For a struggling season, it was quite a good one. But he just wasn't quite as consistent as Pearson, and ended up finishing 3rd in the championship. And the year was so tumultuous with Plymouth trying to improve the Plymouth RoadRunner to match those Fords that Petty actually went to Ford for 1969. So this was his final season with Plymouth for the time anyway. Of course, going right back to them for 1970. But I've actually got 2 versions of Petty's car. I've got the normal all blue Petty blue car that he ran at most of the races. But then I've also got this one with the black roof. It's kind of an infamous car. Petty showing up to Daytona with a black roof on his normally all blue Plymouth. What was going on? NASCAR Man actually has an interesting video about it if you want to learn more, narrated by Brock Beard. So obviously it wasn't that hard to add the black roof version, and thought that'd be kind of fun. So if you want, you can swap that car in at the super speedways. Another driver that you have to have for late 60s, early 70s NASCAR. Cale Yarborough with the Wood Brothers Mercury, who finished 17th in the championship, and that's because the Wood Brothers didn't run a full season back in the 1960s. They only made 21 starts during the season. I think one of those was actually with another car, so something like 20 starts. All of the big races, all of the high-profile races they were always at, but they never really ran for the championship. Just a very different idea from what we're used to in racing these days. But during the season, Cale won the Daytona 500, the Atlanta 500, the Southern 500, and a few other ones. It was a really successful season for the Wood Brothers team, and always a great-looking car. This is another one of those compromises that you have to make when doing one of these things. Bobby Allison, I think, drove for 4 different teams in 1968. This is where he started the season with Bondi Long in the 29 car. Really the first half of the year he drove for this team. Really a top-level team, but he left after the World 600 and I think went to drive for his family car, which I've also included as one of the alternates. And this car was picked up by a few other drivers for the remainder of the season. So it's definitely the more iconic of the cars he drove during the season, so it makes sense to have him there. But Bobby still throughout that season collecting 2 wins, and not quite the Bobby Allison that we would come to know, but one of those stars for the future for sure. Then you've got Leroy Yarborough, of course, driving for Junior Johnson with the Mercury, 2 wins on the season. I thought this one was funny because you'll see a lot of pictures of this car from 1968 with the number 26 on it. But after a string of bad luck, Junior Johnson and Leroy decided to change the number because 26 was just 13 times 2. Or that's the quote anyway. And so they changed it to the 98, which they were much more successful with, ended up winning the 69 Daytona 500. And 68, more of a building year for Leroy, but still a competitor at most of the events, and one of those cars synonymous with the period. And this is a car I always like the look of. Buddy Baker with Ray Fox's number 3 Dodge Charger. A simple car, and all these cars are simple. The painting of these, it's not so complex, but finding the photos and the reference for it is so hard, and I'm sure some of the cars that I've painted with this set are the 1967 version or the 1969 version. I've tried really hard to try to find photos of these cars from the actual races, but even race to race, they would change a bit. They're all hand painted, and if somebody got into an accident, they would obviously paint the car again, slap some different stickers on it in different locations for the contingencies and things. So it's just impossible to find the definitive photo or things for the season, but I've got them as close as I can for as many as possible. And I always really liked these Dodge Chargers, and especially the all-white one with the Ray Fox team. Buddy just 1 win on the season, but the World 600 being that win, that was such a major race in the series. And they were always competitive, but just a lot of bad luck. So as hard as it is to find references for even the major drivers in the 1960s, it's super hard to find them for the lesser known or the more rare entries. This is Pete Hamilton's 1968 car, or at least one of them that he drove during the season. I've seen so many conflicting photos, and I'm pretty sure I got this one right. He ended up driving for King Enterprises later in the season, but early in the year drove for Rocky Hinton, and he had a really impressive run of finishes, so impressive that I got him recognized by some of those other teams. Pete's one of the few drivers from my neck of the woods up in Massachusetts, and so he's one I always remember. Ended up winning the 1970 Daytona 500, driving the number 40 Petty Superbird. But this was just a couple years before that, during his rookie season, and so of course I've put the rookie stripe on the rear bumper. A couple of the areas I did make concessions in the cars was a few of the other makes. Now this is technically an Oldsmobile for Buck Baker, Buck the 56-57 champion and Buddy Baker's father. He was the only real notable Oldsmobile to be run during the season. Buck only really ran at some of the short tracks, but he did make 17 starts, which is pretty significant compared to some of the other drivers, so I felt like I had to include him. And so I've kind of massaged that Oldsmobile onto the Plymouth body. It's not perfect, but it is. It's a game from 1999, so hopefully folks will overlook that. And it's nice to have this car included. It's not one I think I've seen in other sims before. And like I said, I could spend all day looking at all the different drivers. I did do a few of the extra drivers that took part during the season to round out some of the entry lists. Like I said, Bobby Allison's car that he drove for actually more races than the 29. I think this was a family car entered by Donald Brackens. Technically a Chevrolet, one of those other ones. There's quite a few Chevrolets actually. And so I put them on the Torino body style, or it says Mercury, but tried to make it look somewhat like a Chevrolet. If you squint enough, I think it does the job. We've also got Mario Andretti for his Holman-Moody Racing. This is the Mercury that he ran in the Daytona 500. Of course, 1 year out from his surprise win in 1967. Not nearly as lucky in 68. He did enter 3 different races driving for Holman-Moody, and I think ended up having a crash at Daytona. AJ Foyt as well drove a pretty similar car. I actually thought for a while they were the same looking car at first, but AJ's, this was his car for the National 500 at Charlotte very late in the season, and it really looked like a second car to David Pearson that they just painted a different number on and made the nose white. But AJ also raced the 27 for Banjo Matthews that Donnie Allison usually drove, and he drove that 29 that Bobby Allison was in. And so drivers did bounce around quite a bit then, especially these stars that would plop in for a significant race. Butch Hartman's an interesting one, a USAC stock car competitor. In the 60s and early 70s, there was a competing stock car series to NASCAR, and ARCA as well, I guess, but the USAC stock car series was pretty major. And Butch Hartman was one of the few drivers that actually did race on both sides. He entered 5 races on the NASCAR side in 1968. And I always really liked the look of a lot of the USAC cars. They're just a bit different looking than the NASCAR stock cars of the time. A little more of that open wheeler influence, I guess, painted on them. But we've got Butch included with his 75 that he ran for just a few of the races during the season. And had to include a couple of the road course ringers. Of course, one race in the season was on a road course in Riverside, California. One of the early races wasn't the first of the season because there were a couple races in 67, like I said, but the first race of 68 was out in California, and Dan Gurney did the perfect race, entering only one race in the season, that Riverside race, but getting the pole and winning. Has a perfect record for it, so I've made his ratings quite strong. But he raced the number 121 for the Wood Brothers, and I think it was the final victory for a 3-digit car number. And so a fun car just to have in case you want to do a race at Riverside. And of course, if I have got Dan Gurney, I also have to have Parnelli Jones, one of the other open wheelers that went out and raced in California. Still with a great run. I think he finished 3rd in that race. Yeah, like I wrote in there. So getting a top 5, but wasn't able to best Gurney this year. And so it's just a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun trying to learn all of these different drivers and cars and put together a set of cars like this. I could sit here all day and talk you through each one and how difficult it was to find the different logos and things. But I figure I can do that as we try to pass people during a race. So I will set us up for a race. And for this race, I figure maybe we'll take AJ Foyt's Holman-Moody car and drive that one. And if you haven't played these games much before, to drive a car, you just actually move it to the top of the list. You can do that with the greater than and less than keys. And whichever car is at the very top of the list is the one that you will be driving. So we'll take the number 11 Holman-Moody car out and do a mini Rebel 400, which was the first race of the season at Darlington. We'll do a 25% race and put these cars to the test, talk a little bit more about this car set and NASCAR Legends, and show off why 1968 was such a great season. All right, rolling around the high banks of Darlington for the start of our little race. It's a 25% race, but that's still 72 laps. It's going to be quite a long one, but these are a lot of fun. We should have to stop at least once during it. We'll have to see if there's any cautions and stuff, but starting back here, mid-pack pretty much. So we get to pass some cars. I'm alongside Wendell Scott. We got Elmo Langley and Pete Hamilton in front. The rookie, we'll have to watch out for him. And we'll just look at the cars and have fun with this. I've been having a lot of fun doing these races. Darlington is the quintessential stock car track from the 60s. The Southern 500, I think, was by far the biggest race of the season through the 60s and probably into the 70s. And it's just like the home of NASCAR, so it feels appropriate to do a race here. And hopefully we can have a good result and get ourselves towards the front. But here we go, going green. All right, there we go. Green flag is out, and we'll get it up to gears. And I am using an H pattern with this. It is something that you can set up, which is so cool. We'll jump into the first corner on the high side, up behind Pete. We'll just take it nice and easy here, let everybody sort themselves out. So get onto the back stretch, get a nice gap on the low side, see if we can get around him here. James Hilton there in the mirror. NASCAR races back in the 60s, it's all about taking your time. Even with a quarter distance race, it'll sort itself out as long as you don't do something silly and crash yourself. There we go, a nice run on Wendell as well. John Sears in front, he's going to block the low side. We'll follow him into the turn, right on the low side. The high side's actually a little bit easier to get around some of the slower traffic, as Sears is very slow there. Here we go. Get around him on the inside. He's up behind Donnie Allison. We'll box him in and take both of them coming into turn 3. Luckily, we got a little extra space in turns 3 and 4. In 1968, they were still running the original layout to Darlington, which for turns 3 and 4 was a single lane. And if you've never seen it, go watch the films for either the Rebel 400 or the Southern 500 from 1968. Firstly, they're really amazing quality, 4K, high definition videos from the time, both about a half an hour. Just really kind of fun to see the era. But they do show this track as it was from its inception up until 68. And 69 was the first year they widened it to 2 lanes. Widened it, if you want to think of Darlington as wide. But the single lane is wild. Originally, the upper lane was really just meant to be an emergency lane, but it was much faster being banked, so that cars just ended up using it, and they kept it that single lane through 3 and 4 for so many years. And that'd be so neat to have that version on the game here. But we just have the more modern one, but it's still quite a lot of fun. So we've gotten ourselves into a little pocket. We got Elmo Langley in front in the red car. That's a car that I didn't actually realize that was what he drove in 68. Until I was polishing everything and going back over some of the footage. I watched every single race from the 68 season and took pictures of all the cars, because it was the best way to confirm that that was actually the car in the livery that somebody drove in the race. And he's more popular or famous, I guess, for his green cars, but in 68 he was still racing, I think, a 67 Ford that was painted in red with the yellow numbers on it and stuff. So I think that's one I'm not as confident is close, but it's closer than the green version. We're pulling up on them. Hopefully get around a few more of these cars before we get into lap traffic, because that's when things get pretty spicy here. We should hopefully be able to go at least 30 laps. If we can get to 35, that should be about what we need to make it the full distance on one stop. But if it stays green the whole time, we might actually have to stop for a splash of gas at the very end. I mentioned I am using that H pattern, and there is force feedback in this game, and it's very rudimentary. It's really just weight on the wheel that kind of shifts as you get into the banking and stuff, but it helps a lot, and it's pretty impressive. It's a little bit of work to try to get controls to work with this game, but if you can figure out your wheel and stuff, it actually feels pretty good. And it's definitely a little older of a game and feel, but compared to the NASCAR 2 or 3, which are really on the same engine, this has a very distinct feel. The cars slide a lot more. They're a lot more rigid in a lot of ways, but then there's a lot of chassis roll in other ways. It's just a very different feeling game, and I quite like it. It's a little nostalgia for me, but it's also just kind of easy fun once you get a hang of it. All right, we'll toe the high line here, though. We got Tiny Lund in front in the 16 car, some Mercury. We'll slipstream on him, draft him. Hopefully you can pull just in front of Elmo here, and we can slide around both of them. Oh, get a little high there, almost into the wall. A bit loose, have to catch it. There we go. Slide the car coming out of the corner. That'll wear out the tires quick, but you can slide these cars quite a lot before you spin them. Watching the Southern 500 from 1968, Cale Yarborough pounded the outside wall at least a dozen times in that race, and the car is all pancaked flat on the right side and the left, and he still won the race somehow. These cars took an absolute beating back in the day, and at the same time, a lot of folks would have engine trouble and things. It's one of the things you can't get. Oh, as I say it, and a car is entering the pits, it actually looks like Buddy Baker up there. But as I say, you can't quite get the failure rate to be the same in this game as it was in real life. About half of the cars would fail to finish any given race in real life, and I can only get it to be about a quarter of them here, but it's still quite a lot of fun. All right, we got around Tiny Lund there. We'll have a good run on Elmo coming down into 3 and 4. He's going to hold it out there, though. Just slide in front of him and set our sights on Friday Hassler, one of the cooler names in stock car racing. There's a lot of great names in NASCAR history, but Friday Hassler has to be definitely on a top 10 list somewhere. He's chasing Bobby Allison, though. I can see Derringer up the road a little bit, so seems like now that we got the tires up to temp a bit, we're pulling them back in. Still no lap traffic yet, but we'll catch it soon enough, and some of the cars are properly slow. I've got them rated so that they'll be, if you run a full distance race, some of the cars will be like 30 laps down at the end of it, which is very realistic for the time. But I think it is a false memory to say that these races weren't competitive, because there are so many close races from back in the day, and it's not just here and there. I would say the majority of the races had a lot of drama and were quite close. And even like the 69 Daytona 500 is one I just caught up on, but it's a last lap pass for the win with Leroy Yarborough going around Charlie Blatt's back to get the win there. It was a lot more going on than just the battles on the track, the mechanical parts of it, and the pit stop strategy and things. And it's tough to go back and watch these days because there isn't great coverage of it. But the racing was definitely there. Whoa, as we get a little loose coming out of turn 2. It's easy to get pit maneuvered there with the AI sliding up on you. The AI in this game are definitely, it takes some practice to race them without getting into accidents and stuff, because they can be a bit erratic. I find that they're quite good at this track, and at least how I have them set up here. You still have to respect the space with them, but you can learn their movements pretty well and have good races side by side. Lots of good action. Got ourselves in a little gap again. Daryl Derringer in front in the 22. That ride would be picked up by Bobby Allison in 69, like Mario Rossi's car, and they did some great things together. But Daryl Derringer's final real season in NASCAR, I think he did a couple starts after 68, but 68 really was the last season. He did a lot of racing, and it's a good looking car. It's a Plymouth, blue and gold. Some of the colors are really hard to do in this game. This game uses a limited color palette, so there's only like 256 colors to paint with, which sounds like a lot of colors, but I would say there's probably 100 of those are taken up by various shades of gray and white. And so you're left with quite a small selection of colors, and surprisingly, colors like blue are incredibly hard to do. There's only a few different shades of blue, so you'll see some of the cars don't quite look like the right shade, and that's really just due to the game limitation and what you're able to do. I spent a lot of time trying to get something that looked approximate for a lot of the cars. But even like Richard Petty's car is not the right color, which is so surprising that the game didn't have those colors in it, but Petty Blue is not included. It's just kind of a generic sky blue. I still think it looks quite nice, but Derringer's car here is a little more of like a metallic blue than what you're seeing. He's chasing down Leroy Yarborough, Junior Johnson's car there. We'll get out underneath Derringer. He tried to make a move on Leroy and got held up. All right, things are going well now, sliding up the order. We got 55 laps to go, and I can see all the lap traffic ahead. Try to set ourselves up for it. Nice for it. Derringer takes a look low. Ooh, we got a spin in front of us here somewhere. Backed off of it because sometimes we'll just get a car sitting in the middle of the track, but it looks like we got around that. We actually have to do a whole other lap to race back to the line. Yarborough gets held up. Some of the slower cars on the outside. Try to get around as many folks as we can. I think whoever spun out got going again. So we don't have to worry about a stopped car here. Derringer's going to try to get low on Wayne Smith there in the 38. That's a car and a driver that you probably haven't heard of before. I can see Petty in front. I can see Pearson in front. We've actually jumped up the order quite a bit then. So we'll come to the line and get the yellow flag. Get under caution here. All right, so up to 9th place through the first stint there. We'll see if we come in for pit stop. I'm just going to follow everybody else in. And do we change 4 tires or only change 2? We can look at our tire wear and everything. Maybe we'll try to just change 2 tires and see what happens. Just change the 2 right sides, get full fuel. If people pit, we'll watch to see if folks pit, and if they don't, we'll stay out as well. Because with this yellow flag, we might actually make it
Pit road is closed.
Might actually make it to the end with only one more stop.
Now open.
I'm going to stay out. I see that it's actually split, which is so interesting. You don't get that much, but like Bobby Isaac up there stayed out. We got a lot of lap cars in front of us, but I'll pick up a few spots here because of the folks pitting, and we still all have to pit one more time. There's no way they're going to make it from here to the end, so it's a gamble, but that's what stock car racing's all about. All right, so I'll come back when we go green, and we'll see how it plays out. On the backstretch now, coming to the green. I'm up in 6th position. We got some lap traffic on the inside, of course, that we'll have to work around here right on the start. But Cale Yarborough leads the way. So I've passed like 5 cars through the pit stops. We got some cars that have pit. A lot of us haven't up front here. And my hopes that it'll stay green now, and we'll just get this position. But we'll see how long that lasts. Try to get a good start here. Avoid some of these slow cars. I can see Ed Negri on the inside has some big fender damage there. All right, green flag's out. Derringer's a little slow off the line. Have to watch for some checkups with some of the slow cars here. Oh, as we have it, Derringer rides through the middle lane. We'll see if we can go around him on the high side. All right, up to 4th gear. Slide down the outside. Paul Dean Holt there on the inside in the 01. Neil Castells ahead of David Pearson. I stayed out during the pit stop. Pearson stayed out. It felt like the smart thing to do to follow what Pearson's doing. But we're going to get held up behind Don Tarr and Neil Castells trying to figure themselves out. So hit the brakes there a little bit. Paul Dean Holt's going to come back on me. That's a driver I had never heard of. It's so hard to find pictures of that car. But I think I got it pretty accurate. I found one photo in a newspaper of it rolled upside down, and that's how I got the numbers and stuff. All right, Bobby Isaacs get held up behind Don Tarr. Try to get both of them. I believe Don Tarr was a surgeon who decided he liked doing NASCAR racing for fun. Don't get too much more 60s than that. As Neil Castells, slow car, a lap down. This gets us up, I think, into 3rd spot. Derringer's going to follow us through. So just clip the apron there into turn 1. Turned in just a little too soon. We'll ride that on the way out. We're chasing Cale Yarborough in front. And he's up there battling with somebody. Might be Charlie Glassback in the 6th car. See if we can get a little space here on Derringer behind. So it must have been, I haven't gone back to watch the replay yet, I would have shown it to you, but it must have been Ed Negri that had some sort of issue or got involved there in turn 4, which is what brought out that yellow. Ed, of course, that car would have been the car that Dale Earnhardt got his first start in I think 1976 or 5 at Charlotte. For the 500 at Charlotte. He raced for Ed. I really enjoy, if you can't tell, and I guess if you're this far into this kind of video, you're also kind of like this stuff, but I really like researching teams and owners and how they evolved over time and learning stuff about which drivers raced for which teams. I had no idea that AJ Foyt raced the 27 car that Donnie Allison drove for most of the season, but AJ Foyt raced that car at a couple races at the beginning of the year. The driver swapping and stuff is really interesting. You know, I think you think of drivers like a Bobby Allison or something as such a major driver, but in 1968 he was still trying to get his footing, and so he raced for a bunch of different teams just to try to figure it out, and I think got that winning combination with Mario Rossi heading into 69. But it's a really cool time frame, and I've always wanted something like this for NASCAR Legends. And why 1968? Purely because I think that's really the first year that you can pull off with the shape of the cars in the game. I think they just don't quite fit earlier years than 1968, and heading into the future, into the 70s, even 1971, the shape of the Chrysler changed so much with the Dodge Charger as well as Plymouth's car. the RoadRunner and everything into 71 that it just doesn't look quite right. Now, I don't think I've mentioned up until this point, but there are a great set of cars that were painted for the mid and late 70s over at a website called retrosim, which I'll put a link in the description. And I think they've got every season from 75 through 80, and also 1972, which is very cool. And I've actually used those quite a bit, and I've been working on a little project to try to make a more accurate car shape for those cars, especially for the mid-70s ones, for the Chargers and things. I'll put a little screenshot here. I'm having some problems with it, and hoping to get those sorted out so that I could release that to go along with those sets, and that would make those mid-70s and late 70s ones just look a lot more accurate. But I do feel like with the default car as we have it here, the late 60s and into 1970, like, it's a shame we never had full car sets for 68, 69, and 70. 70 really is the only year that we had most of the cars done, and they're from many, many different people that painted them. And they, you know, back when some of these were painted in the early 2000s, there just wasn't a lot of resources, so the accuracy isn't quite there. So I would really love to do 69 and 70 for this sim as well, and try to get everything up to the same standard here. Hopefully, for anybody that does play this, hopefully this car set is welcome. And if you would want to see some more years, I could be convinced to do it, because a lot of the cars don't change a lot between 68 and 68 and 69, and also 1970. There's a lot of similarities in the cars. So it would be, now that I've got so many of them painted, not be too hard to change the logos a little bit, or change a color here or there, and get things going for 1969. Alright, I'm pulling in Cale Yarborough here. Got 39 laps to go. Bobby Isaac's behind. We're going to catch a whole bunch of lap traffic soon. I can feel it that they're probably all packed up. And we got some of the fast cars in the rear too, which will make things kind of interesting. So once we do catch lap traffic, it's going to be quite difficult. But we'll see if we can sneak around Cale here and maybe charge up to the lead with Charlie Glotz back there before we have to make our pit stop. We're getting lower on fuel. Fuel gauge on the left side, not like a real fuel gauge, it actually shows you how much is left, but it's all for fun. Alright, I can see the cars 3 wide up there just popping into view. Try to get Cale here before we get up to that lap traffic. Move it to the high side. Wood Brothers machine, understeering a little bit there. Tires, I can feel them starting to get pretty worn, so I'm going to have to be very careful here getting through the lap traffic, not to spin myself out or run into the wall or something. But we might have a shot at getting up to the lead, just trying to get through the traffic with everybody. Whoa. Just a little bit of a Darlington stripe there, all right. Wow, they're really, really packed up. This is going to be quite tricky. Now would be not a bad time to pit, necessarily. We're still a little long, though, to make it to the end, so I can't pit quite yet. If I could make it to the end, though, now would be the perfect time to pit. Alright, you can see James Hilton in the back there. This is his first year in the yellow car there, the 48. It's his first year as a owner-driver, which he was really famous for. He raced for so many years, ultimately doing Cup for a while, but then down to ARCA. Well up into his 70s he raced. Always that 48 car. Alright. Follow Cale through in the low side. He's up behind Bill Champion there. See if we can get around Cale in the traffic. He's going to get boxed in with Friday Warren. Or not Friday Warren, Frank Warren. Cale's going to look low on Frank Warren. Frank fades a bit low. Ultimately lets Cale through. I'll follow him through here. Just snaking your way through the traffic. It's not quite like it was. In real life, a lot of the slower cars would stay down low. Oh, as Cale gets boxed in up high there, we'll get around him. Slow cars would pretty much always stay to the low side, and faster cars would go around, but there were plenty of instances where cars would get held up in traffic and cause some pretty crazy accidents. I know Hurtubise had a huge crash here at the Southern 500 from something like that. As Cale gets back around me, up underneath, like Stan Meservey. He's a one season and done driver. He raced a lot of the season, but never raced in Grand National or the top division of NASCAR again after 1968. He's from Maine as well in that 51 I just got around. All right, 33 laps to go. Right on the edge. I need to get within 30 laps to make sure we make it to the end. So just a couple more laps and we can come into the pits. And we'll definitely want to do a 4-tire stop. But it will be under green, which isn't good, as GC Spencer slides up on the outside. That's a car I'm not 100% convinced is accurate. Not only is it a 68 Plymouth and not maybe a 67 like he drove, but it's tough to find good photos of that one. Just sneak alongside Paul Dean Holt as well. Oh, he's going to squeeze me right to the wall. And I should mention, I welcome if anybody finds better photos of any of these cars. I'm happy to make an update, release an addendum that fixes some schemes that maybe I did the 69 version instead of the 68 one. I would love to make it more accurate. So I definitely don't take any feedback as negative. It's tough to find the resources on cars like this, and I know folks got hidden photos and stuff or things they've seen that aren't really easy to find. So would love to make it even more accurate. We got the one car on the outside there. That's Bud Moore, who up until I painted this set, I thought that was the Bud Moore that went on to be a very famous crew chief car owner for the 15 car, but that is a different Bud Moore. It's Little Bud Moore, as he was called, to separate him from, I guess, Big Bud Moore. But Little Bud Moore drove a couple different teams during this season. It's those little things that are fun to learn. We just work our way through the traffic here. Earl Brooks on the low side. Cale got around me, and he's doing a little bit better of a job than I am. All right, we got a couple cars pitting in front. We'll come around next time to pit. Yeah, we just hit the red section on the fuel, so it's a good idea to pit. We'll have to change our tires to do all 4. We could probably get away with 2, but that left rear would get awful worn out here. So we'll come around turns 1 and 2 and get ourselves set up for a pit stop, full fuel, 4 tires. It is tricky to pit here at Darlington. I'm gonna actually enter from turn 3. Ride the apron the whole way around to avoid any kind of AI collisions. Get it down a couple of gears, understeer on the flat. Oh, Charlie Glotzback's going into. All right, so we'll have to see where we come out. This might actually work out in our favor. We're going to be quite far behind those cars that pit earlier, but they're going to have to pit again if it stays green. All right, coming to stop. Pit stops are quite long in this because it simulates the 1970s, so we'll be stopped here for quite a long while, having them change 4 tires. As you can see, the fuel's almost full. I think in real life, they often would only change a couple tires at most stops. They wouldn't change all 4 very often, but I think we're going to go to the end here. As you can see, Glotzback leaving, so he maybe only did 2 tires. Maybe he did 4 as well. They're pretty similar time. All right, come down the pit lane. No pit speed to worry about. Love that about this game. We've got Buddy Baker in the pits there. Whoa, looks like that's Donnie Allison, 27 car, Banjo Matthews car. Get it up the gears. And I'm going to rejoin right behind that whole pack again. So here comes David Pearson on by. I'm not sure if he's stopped yet. Yeah, he's right in front of me, so Pearson's the car we're chasing. We'll take a look at the leaderboard here. I'm 21st right now, a lap down. But that'll continue to change, so I'm not too worried about it yet. We just have to hope it stays green for all those cars that pit earlier to come in now. But one of the things I really like about this game is how it feels very organic, how the races play out. The cars break down a little bit more, not as much as they should, but they break down a little bit more than they do in some of the other NASCAR games, like NASCAR 2 and 3. The accidents are a little more sporadic. You can really control how frequent stuff like that happens too in the track files. And so you can tune things to how you want them, and I just like how the strategy all works out and stuff. I'd like when I'm doing some NASCAR sim racing, especially just for fun, have some really long green flag periods as everybody gets backed up here with cars like coming in and out of the pits and lap traffic. And if you do a long race, it gets really confusing as to which cars are actually on your lap or not. much like real life, as we'll sneak below Jabe Thomas there in the white car. I just got to watch for cars pitting. That's what I'm worried about. Got another car coming out of the pits. I think it's Don Tar again. Right, I need to get around some of these cars. Bobby Isaac's heading in. Oh, he bounced off the wall there. I don't know if that was an issue with Bobby or what. I can't go through wide into the corner. Let's see if we can swing around the outside. Bill Champion up there, but maybe we can split him down the middle. Here comes Cale out of the pits. This will be for position. So everybody's going to get squeezed up on the outside. Get it down a gear. Friday Hassler going to get around me there. Losing a lot of spots just through the cars coming in and out of the pits. But it seemed like Bobby Isaac had an issue. Maybe went to retire and didn't quite make the pit road. I'm not sure. All right, we'll sneak up the inside of Friday. It's a little tricky coming down the inside there, but just able to sneak in front of him onto the banking. There we go. Everybody's sorting themselves out. Don't be too hasty. There are just 23 laps to go, though, so you got to push a little bit more than at the start of the race. There's John Sears there on the outside. Big John, as he was known. Slide in front of him. James Hilton. 46 car is going to just get us to the inside. Friday is actually quite strong here today. He's not always strong. I've set up the cars rating-wise that, in a race, if you do 10 races, the usual suspects will be up front, but every once in a while you'll have one of the independents be a little faster. Like it was. Randomly, there'll just be somebody that really outperforms that day. Maybe they got a good set of tires or the right strategy. But usually it's going to be one of the top teams that comes out on top. All right, chasing down Cale Yarborough then. We're in 16th. We're still a lap down. There's 21 laps to go, but I imagine those leaders that pit are going to have to start pitting hopefully soon. We really just don't want there to be a yellow flag right now, as Cale's going to get around Stan Meserve, or Meserve. This is a car I mentioned. He only raced for the one season out of Maine, and it's one that's tough to get photos of. I think I got it pretty close, but not the best looking car. That's also one that definitely would not have been one of the new Dodges. Would have been an older model, but it looks quite nice there. Sneak up the inside of GC. Cale is pretty quick. I found the AI too. They'll slow down earlier in the race. They'll get a lot faster towards the end as they try to push towards the end of the race, and we might be experiencing that here a little bit. Cale can smell the victory if he can.
20 more laps.
Yeah, 20 more laps to go. I do have the spotter on. There wouldn't have been radios in 1968, but you'd need it in the game to know where you're supposed to be under caution and stuff like that. So I don't have the spotter on. I just have the crew chief who tells you the really important stuff. I feel like that's a good concession. We'll slipstream up the back here. The only Pontiac that we've painted, or that I've painted for this set, with Roy Tyner. It's another one of those. Don't look too closely, but it kind of looks like a Pontiac on the Plymouth body there. But Roy raced with Pontiac for quite a few years. He had a much cooler paint scheme, I think, starting in 1969 with Pepsi sponsorship, red, white, and blue. But for 68, he just had a big white Pontiac. Right, up the outside. Whoa, we'll get a little bit of a Darlington stripe there as we'll get around JD McDuffie. The only Buick in the field, behind the only Oldsmobile in the field here, with Buck Baker in the 88. Oh, JD's going to slide up in front. We got Dick Johnson behind him too, and that's not the Australian Dick Johnson, as JD squeezes me on the low side. I'm going to lose a whole bunch of time there. The 18 here is Dick Johnson, who I could not really find any information about. I'm happy I found a photo with the car in it, because this one I know is actually pretty close to what Dick Johnson's car looked like. But only thing I know is that he was a West Coast driver, and those were pretty rare in NASCAR in the 60s. So outside of those big few that did like the Riverside race and stuff with Dan Gurney and them. All right, up the inside of Wayne Smith, come to the line, getting down towards the end here, and I guess I'm chasing Buck Baker. I didn't realize he was on the lead lap up front, but he must have been one of those cars that pit early on and maybe still has to pit. I'm not sure. We'll slide around the outside of Buck. go. In front of his Oldsmobile there. Ben Arnold here in front of me, and then Clyde Lynn in front of him in the 20. I think this was also one of Clyde Lynn's final seasons driving multiple races. Maybe did one or two more seasons after this, but I like how that car looks. There's quite a few red and white cars, you'll notice. I don't know if that was just popular at the time, but especially on the Mercury and Fords, I feel like I painted quite a few red and white and black kind of cars. Tony Lund and Clyde Lynn and stuff. John Sears. Must have been what was popular then. Alright, Richard Brickhouse here in the 03 in front. Rookie stripe, not 100% sure he had a rookie stripe, but I didn't see that he started any races prior than 68, so felt like he needed one. He's chasing another rookie in front, Dave Marcus, and that's one we all know. Rookie season for 1968. He only did, I think, 10 races, not too many, and didn't do very well in them. I think probably not racing in the best equipment then, but he would go on to get good really quick. In just a couple of years, he was racing up front. All right, we're chasing the number 5 now, Pete Hamilton. It's interesting, some of these cars up front. It has to be because of the pit stop strategy. I guess we started right behind Pete, but he's been doing that Rookie of the Year kind of race. That's why he won it, I guess. Try to stay up high and get a good run down the front stretch. I feel the car's waking up a little bit. Around half tank is when you start sliding the tires quite a bit more, at least with the setup I've got here. Around Neil as well there. All right. Finally, a little bit of open track. Goes through periods of just nothing, and then you hit a pack of cars, and it's really, really tricky to get through them all without getting in an accident. We'll try to do this final 12 laps, though. I don't know if I'll be able to catch Derringer now in front. Have these guys pit yet? We're still a lap down in 11th. We should be able to get a top 10 here, but I think we're still waiting for him to pit, so it's going to come down to the wire. So enter turn 1 there, a little too hot. Turn 1 and 2, of course, are the tighter end on this version. Modern Darlington, this is where the front stretch is. They changed it in the late 90s, I believe. Probably so they could build out the grandstands and stuff even more. But for many years, what is now the backstretch was the front stretch, like we have here. And so turns 1 and 2 are the tight ones. I always remember it as the one with the tower is the tight corner. And it doesn't change your driving style too much on this version of Darlington with these cars. But again, I'd love that tighter version of Darlington that they raced in 68 with just the single lane 3 and 4. I think that would be a fun challenge with these physics. All right, they're pitting, so we should be able to get around a couple cars. I can see that might be Petty in the pits now. Just 10 laps to go, and it's all going to come down to this. So we got a couple more cars pitting. I think that's Bill Champion headed up the inside there. Slow down Derringer in front a little bit. Car's going to be exiting and entering the pits too, which is definitely the easiest time to make contact with the AI. So we got EJ Trevette and Wendell Scott. These are for position in front of me. To do Foyt proud here, pick up a couple spots from the cars pitting up to 9th place now. I can see Petty coming out of the pits in front. As there's Ed Negri sliding up the track a little bit, get around Wendell. Might have a run here at Petty down the back stretch as he gets up to speed. Pass him on the inside. There we go. Try to keep that Plymouth behind me. He might have a set of maybe 2 new tires now, so he could be quite fast here towards the end of the race. But back on the lead lap, up to 6 with just a few laps to go. A couple of cars entering the track in front as well. Stan Meservey. All right, we're still chasing Derringer. He's right there in front of me in the 22, the gold car. Gonna slide up the inside of Henley Gray. This is another car. I think he had a few different styles and numbers and stuff during the season, so I chose one of them to paint. A couple cars coming out of the pits then on the front stretch. Derringer's gonna get squeezed in by Roy Tyner. There weren't spotters in 68, but it is definitely a little bit of a cheap shot with the AI, but I'll take it. Get past him. Clyde Lynn on the outside. We got Bobby Allison in front too. I'm chasing Cale Yarborough, though. I guess Bobby's gone a lap down somehow. All right, he'll get in front of Don Tarr. Oh, Bobby's a bit slow. He didn't run very well in that 29, which is, I think, why he left it. Maybe some bad luck. The car was a quick car and definitely had some interesting drivers. I think even Sweet Savage drove a couple races in 1968 in the 29 there. All right, trying to get around Ben Arnold here to 3 and 4 and see if I can get up to Cale. Cale's just eluding me a bit. He's pretty good through the traffic. Ben's gonna sit in the middle of the track, so I'll have to try to pick a side and squeeze through, slide the car a little bit. All right, Cale might get held up by a lapper here. Let's see, I think it was is that Butch Hartman that came out of the pits there? So Cale's gonna slide up. He's behind the 1. Bud Moore, oh, a bad entry by a car there in front. I think that might have been Wendell. Slide up the inside, that's Frank Warren. The 16 Tiny Lund squeezes me down low. Taking a lot of risk here, but I want to try to get up to Cale's. Wendell's gonna squeeze the inside here on the exit of the corner. He's just trying to stay alive. It's the 1 car on the outside. All right, we'll get both of them. 4 laps to go. I pulled in, I got a little bit on Cale through all that mess. Try to carry the speed on the high line there. Fighting for 3rd spot. Pearson, Glotzbacher way up in the lead, so unlikely we'll be able to catch them. GC Spencer to negotiate, but I think everybody's come in and out of the pits, so we're done with some of that craziness. And we can just focus on a flat-out race here to the end. 3 laps to go. Fighting for, I guess you'd call it a podium, although those aren't really a thing in NASCAR. GC, oh, he's going to slide up. He's just trying to stay alive. GC, one of the real old guard that was in NASCAR at this time. It's interesting that in the full 1968 field, there, at least the ones I've created here, there were only 3 former champions that were still driving. Richard Petty, David Pearson, and Buck Baker was the 3rd one. But Ned Jarrett had retired at this point, and all the other champions had gone from the sport at this point. So it really was kind of the turning of an age. As J.D. McDuffie will slide up the outside there. You can kind of squeeze through on the outside there, but it can be quite tricky. As Cale is going to come up on Buck, and maybe Buck will be a little hard-headed and not let him by. 2 laps to go as we come to the line. Great exit through turn 4 there as Cale gets held up a little bit. We'll slide up the inside. Bill Champion's going to be right in front of us, though. Oh, make a little contact. Likely not to spin out as Cale's going to come back down low. Oh, we got somebody spinning out. Yellow flag. Oh, we'll slide up and hit the wall on the exit with Bill Champion there. So this will be the end of the race as we come to the line. Well, the final lap under yellow, I guess, is indicative of the 1970s. We've got James Hilton in front here. We'll just follow him around the corner. Cale's coming out. Coming up behind. We should get the yellow here, though. There it is. The yellow and the white.
Stay behind on 48 cars.
At the same time to end the race. Won't pass any more cars there. We were letting them by, don't worry. I feel like that's the perfect ending for something like this. I did end up getting the position on Cale. He gives me a tap on the side. He's not happy with it. But the race will end under yellow. I'll have to take a look back at whatever that final crash was. I think I was involved somehow with the car spinning out. But man, a fun little race there. I hope that was fun to watch. I really enjoyed putting this set of cars together and learning, everything about the series and what it was like in 1968, who all the different teams were, and try to research their car designs to put them together into something that resembles a 1968 set, and I think I did all right. I'm pretty proud of it, and hope there's at least one or two folks out there that still plays this game and you know, enjoys it as much as I have.
We'll get them next time.
But finishing, I think that's third place for me. Driving as AJ Foyt here with the Holman-Moody car. I think that's pretty good coming from deep in the pack, and who knows, with another 3/4 of a race, we probably could have fought for the win against Charlie Glotzback. But that's going to be it for this one. I hope you enjoyed watching. I'll put a link to download this on a little site that I'm putting together for a few of these things that I'm making. I'll put that in the description of the video for anybody to check out. But that's it for now. And so until next time, maybe with the 1969 set in NASCAR Legends, this is GP Laps, and I'll see you all again later.